Everything began on the morning of April 12th, my 16th birthday. I woke up to a silence that felt almost frightening. It wasn't the lazy quiet of a typical Saturday, with the faint hum of the coffee machine or the murmur of the television in the background. It was an empty, hollow silence that made it clear I was completely alone in that large house. I grew up in a cold family where care and affection were almost non-existent. The house was spacious, yet it was always wrapped in a heavy, suffocating stillness. My parents rarely spoke to me, and even more rarely asked how I was feeling or took the time to listen. To them, I was like a faint shadow present, only to complete the appearance of a whole family. Our meals were eaten in silence. There was no laughter, no stories shared, just the dry clatter of utensils against plates. Whenever I tried to start a conversation, they would respond with distant looks or brief, dismissive answers, as if my presence was an inconvenience. I learned early on to withdraw into myself, to live quietly and avoid drawing attention. At school, I didn't have many friends. My insecurity and self-doubt made it hard to connect with others. The whispers behind my back and the judging glances only deepened my belief that I was different and somehow unworthy of love. When I came home, I would quietly close my bedroom door and lose myself in books or sad music, searching for a small sense of comfort. That was the only world where I truly felt safe. Deep down, I always longed to hear my parents say they loved me, that I mattered to them, but that small, simple wish never came true. Instead, I grew up surrounded by distance, indifference, and invisible scars etched into my heart. I never knew what I had done wrong, nor did I understand why I was treated that way. I only knew that, within my own family, I constantly felt out of place, alone, and abandoned. That morning began like any other, quiet and heavy. I walked downstairs to the kitchen feeling drained, expecting nothing more than another long day slipping by in silence. But the moment I stepped into the living room, I noticed a piece of paper placed neatly on the table. My heart tightened with a sudden sense that something was wrong. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and the words struck my eyes like icy blades. "Stay out of sight, freak." Just 4 short words, yet they were enough to leave me frozen. I read them again and again, hoping I had misunderstood, but I hadn't. It was my mother's handwriting. There was no explanation, no goodbye, just a cruel dismissal. My mind spun, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. I ran through the house, calling out for my parents in desperation, but the only answer was a terrifying silence. Their bedroom was empty, the closets had been cleared out, familiar belongings had vanished without a trace. They were truly gone. The feeling of abandonment flooded through me, heavy and suffocating, stealing the air from my lungs. I sank down onto the floor, still clutching the note tightly in my hand. Questions crashed over me all at once. What had I done wrong? Why would they treat me like this? Was I really such a burden to them? Tears streamed down my face, impossible to hold back. In that moment, I felt completely alone, as if the entire world had turned its back on me. The house that had once been my only shelter now felt unfamiliar and colder than ever. The few memories I had there seemed distorted, overshadowed by pain and betrayal. I had no idea what the future would look like, no idea where I would go or what I would do. I only knew that from the moment I read that note, my life had veered in an entirely different direction, a path filled with uncertainty, fear, and despair. After reading the note, I sat motionless for a long time in the empty house. The silence around me was terrifying, broken only by the heavy ticking of the clock. I tried to steady myself, but my mind was a storm of tangled thoughts. My parents had truly left, abandoning me to face a shock far too overwhelming to bear alone. I didn't know whether to cry, to feel angry, or to run after them and search for answers. Confusion and fear closed in around me, making it almost impossible to breathe. I began checking every room, every corner of the house, hoping to find some kind of clue. But everything was still. There wasn't a single sign that they were coming back. The bank account had been locked. Their phones were unreachable. The neighbors said they had seen my parents leave very early that morning. The harsh truth slowly revealed itself. I had been completely abandoned. That night, I curled up under a blanket, trembling in my loneliness and helplessness. The future ahead looked like a dark road without a single light to guide me. I wondered whether I was strong enough to survive this when even the people who were supposed to love me most had turned away. Yet deep inside the despair, a small spark of hope flickered. As long as I was still alive, I still had a chance to change my own fate. In that moment, I made a decision. I would not let myself collapse. I would stand up, step by step, even if each step was slow and painful. And if you have ever felt as lonely and lost as I did then, leave a comment with the number 1 so we can share, encourage one another, and remind each other that we're not alone. 3 days after my parents disappeared, my life drifted by in a haze of exhaustion and confusion. I barely ate. I just sat quietly in the empty house, trying to piece together what had happened. Every small sound outside made my heart jump, half hoping they had returned, half terrified of facing the cruel reality again. Then, on a gloomy afternoon, the doorbell rang, shattering the silence that had filled the house for days. I hesitated for a few seconds before opening the door. Standing in front of me was a middle-aged man in a neatly pressed suit. His expression was serious, yet his eyes carried a sharp, searching look. He introduced himself as a lawyer representing a file directly related to me. That single sentence was enough to send a chill through my entire body. I had never been involved in anything legal, and I couldn't understand why a lawyer would be looking for me at a time like this. The lawyer slowly opened his briefcase and took out a stack of documents, their pages slightly yellowed with age. He placed them in front of me, his expression firm, as though he were about to reveal a truth that could change my life forever. His voice was calm, but each word felt heavy, pressing down on my chest. He said that I was not the biological child of the parents who had raised me. I had been adopted at birth, under a special legal agreement that they were required to keep confidential for many years. My ears rang, my mind spun, as if the ground beneath my feet had suddenly collapsed. Every memory of my childhood, every moment of coldness and neglect suddenly made sense. I had never truly belonged there. The truth was painful and cruel, but it also explained why I had always been treated like an outsider. The lawyer continued, revealing that my biological mother had owned the house in Westport, along with a wooden cabin in Vermont, land in Maine, an educational trust fund, and a valuable art collection. My biological parents had left behind an enormous inheritance and significant assets, but everything could only be transferred to me once I reached legal adulthood and my true identity was officially confirmed. My adoptive parents, fearing they would lose control of that wealth, had deliberately concealed my identity and kept me in the dark. And when the truth was on the verge of being exposed, they chose to disappear rather than face legal responsibility. I sat there in stunned silence, tears streaming down my face. Not because of the money, but because of the betrayal that had shaped my entire life. Yet even in the depths of that heartbreak, I felt a new spark of hope beginning to glow. I had a chance to start over. A chance to live as my true self. If you're following this story and want to know how I'll face this truth, leave a comment with the number 1, and I'll continue sharing. After hearing everything, I remained silent for a long time, unable to say a word. My emotions felt torn apart and mixed together pain, anger, hurt, and an emptiness I couldn't fully describe. For years, I had blamed myself for not being good enough. I had tried to change, hoping to earn love. But the truth was, I had never truly belonged there from the beginning. That realization freed me from the insecurity that had haunted me for so long, yet it also left a deep, hollow space in my heart. Old memories came rushing back one after another. My mother's cold stare, my father's endless silence, the joyless dinners, the baseless scoldings. Suddenly, everything made sense. But understanding the reason didn't make the pain fade. If anything, it deepened the emptiness inside me. I realized I had never truly been loved. I couldn't help but wonder, had they ever seen me as their child, even for a brief moment. I went through many sleepless nights, drowning in tangled thoughts. There were moments when I wanted to hate them, to scream out all the bitterness I had swallowed for years. But more than anger, I felt sorrow for myself. I understood that if I kept clinging to this pain, I would never be able to move forward. I had to learn to let go of the past, even if it was the hardest thing I had ever done. Little by little, I began to accept the truth and face it with calmness. I realized that family is not defined by blood alone, but by love and respect. If that house could not give me those things, then I would build a new world for myself, a place where I could be who I truly am, without hiding in the shadows or living in fear. That was the true beginning of my journey into adulthood. After many days lost in thought, I decided I would no longer run from reality. I understood that if I stayed trapped in fear and the past, I would lose the one chance I had to change my life. I started with the smallest things: cleaning the house, organizing old belongings, and getting rid of items that carried painful memories. With every object I put away, I felt as if I were setting down a piece of the weight I had carried in my heart. I worked with the lawyer to complete all the legal procedures needed to confirm my true identity. The process wasn't simple, but every signature and every official seal carried deep meaning. Step by step, I was reclaiming ownership of my life. For the first time, I felt that I had a voice, that I mattered, that I was being respected. The change filled me with both anxiety and excitement about a future I had never even dared to imagine. During the 2 weeks of preparation, Dorothy and I uncovered even more disturbing truths. My father had drained the education fund my mother had set up for me in order to pay Chloe's tuition at New York University. In official documents, he referred to me as the girl, not his daughter. When I returned home pretending to gather information, I saw Victoria wearing my mother's engagement ring, the one my father had claimed was lost long ago. Even the logo of their new charity was taken directly from my mother's monogram, copied from her old sketchbook. At 10:07 that morning, in Fairfield Family Court, Dorothy presented all the evidence: the original will, the document in which my father had relinquished his parental rights, and Victoria's handwritten notes. Judge Holloway, who had once known my mother personally, immediately granted guardianship to Dorothy and ordered all of my mother's assets to be frozen. At the same time, I began taking better care of myself. I exercised regularly, ate healthier meals, and slowly allowed myself to open up to the world around me. I met new people, listened to different stories, and gradually realized that life held so many beautiful possibilities I had never been given the chance to experience. With each passing day, I grew stronger and more confident, no longer afraid of the way others looked at me. Even though the road ahead was still filled with challenges, I no longer felt alone. I learned to trust myself, to believe that my past did not define who I was. Old wounds slowly began to close, making room for new hope and faith. I knew this journey had only just begun, but this time I would walk it on steady feet, with a heart full of determination and a deep desire to truly live. Just when everything seemed to be settling down, one afternoon I received a call from an unknown number. On the other end was a voice so familiar it hurt my mother's. She said they wanted to see me, that it was time to explain everything. My heart tightened, caught between tension and confusion. After everything that had happened, I didn't know if I had the courage to face them, but in the end, I decided to go, not to seek an apology, but to close the old chapter of my life on my own terms. We met at a small, quiet cafe. When I saw them sitting across from me, I noticed how much more worn and exhausted they looked. The coldness that once filled their eyes had been replaced by anxiety and avoidance. They admitted they had lived in fear for years, afraid the truth would come out, afraid of losing everything they had. That fear, they said, had turned them into selfish people, willing to sacrifice my feelings to protect themselves. Every confession they made weighed heavily on my heart. I didn't feel any sense of triumph, nor did I feel relieved, only a deep sadness quietly settling inside me. I understood that they were flawed, fearful people who had made terrible mistakes. But that understanding did not erase the wounds I had carried for so many years. In the end, I told them that I didn't hate them, but I couldn't simply go back to the way things were, as if nothing had happened. I needed time to heal and to build a new life for myself. When I walked out of the cafe, I felt something inside me gently close a door that had been left open for far too long. And in its place, there was a quiet sense of peace I had been searching for all along. As time passed, I learned to slow down and truly listen to myself. The old wounds didn't disappear overnight, but they no longer cut as deeply as before. I came to understand that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about accepting what happened and choosing to move forward with a stronger heart. Every morning when I wake up, I remind myself that today is a new beginning and that I deserve better things in life. I began building my life in ways I had never dared to dream of before. I learned new skills, pursued work I genuinely loved, and formed healthy relationships. Gradually, sincere people entered my life, people who were willing to listen and truly understand me. Through them, I realized that family isn't defined only by blood, but by care, empathy, and mutual respect. There were days when old memories would unexpectedly return, carrying a quiet trace of sadness, but instead of avoiding them, I faced them calmly. I allowed myself to be vulnerable when I needed to be, and then found the strength to stand back up again. I no longer blamed the past, because those very wounds had shaped me into a stronger, more resilient version of myself. Looking back on the journey I've traveled, I feel deeply grateful that I didn't give up. From a girl who once felt abandoned and lost, I learned to love myself, to value who I am, and to believe in the future. My life may have begun in pain, but I chose to shape its continuation with hope, faith, and peace, and that is the greatest gift I could ever give myself. After everything I've been through, I've come to understand that the most valuable thing isn't what I've achieved, but who I've become. From someone who once lived in fear, insecurity, and a constant need for validation, I learned how to stand firmly on my own 2 feet. I stopped searching for my worth in the approval or judgment of others and began building it from within. I learned to listen to my emotions, to respect my personal boundaries, and to allow myself to rest when I felt exhausted. I came to understand that being strong doesn't mean constantly forcing yourself to endure everything. It means having the courage to admit when you're vulnerable and still choosing to move forward. Every scar from the past became a lesson, reminding me to appreciate the present and to live more honestly with myself. I also gradually opened my heart to the world, welcoming new relationships with caution but not with walls. I chose not to close myself off. I believe that somewhere out there are people warm enough to truly love and understand me. And when I find them, I will know how to cherish them, protect those connections, and give back with all my sincerity. Looking back on the road I've traveled, I no longer blame fate. The losses, the pain, and the challenges have shaped me into someone stronger, deeper, and more resilient. I now understand that no matter how painful our starting point may be, we still have the right to rewrite our own story. And from this day forward, I choose to live with faith, hope, and a heart that is no longer afraid. After everything, I learned how to slow down and pay closer attention to what was happening inside me. In the past, I was always chasing goals, achievements, and other people's expectations, forgetting to truly listen to my own feelings. This upheaval was like a sudden break, forcing me to stop, reflect, and change direction. I began to appreciate stillness. Early mornings spent sitting on the porch, watching a light mist settle over the lake, became precious moments for restoring my balance. In that quiet space, I understood my own desires more clearly. I began to see what truly mattered and what I could finally let go of. I was no longer swept away by comparisons or the invisible pressures of society. I also learned how to forgive not only others, but myself. I used to blame myself for trusting too easily, for being too soft.